Here is the step-by-step guide for how non-US business owners can open up a US LLC remotely. See, most non-US citizens don't realize that a US LLC is a legal entity that anyone can open up completely online. And by doing this, it unlocks benefits that are simply not available in any other country, such as lower taxes, access to capital, and premium credit cards that give you higher cashback and free travel. In fact, if you're a non-US business owner watching this right now, this would be the perfect opportunity for you, even though you've got a legal entity in another country such as the UAE, in Cyprus, or any other country. See, I personally live in Canada. I've got a US LLC, and that US LLC unlocks financial products which I've personally got access to $250,000 in American credit for me to scale my business. That's why in today's video, I'm gonna break down exactly how you can open up your US LLC step by step, and how to avoid common mistakes that get your future credit applications rejected even before you apply. And by the way, this is for education purposes only, so I would always advise you to seek a professional or a lawyer to advise you on your specific situation. Without further ado, let's get straight into it. So moving on to the first step, a lot of non-US business owners like to start by asking, well, why a US LLC? Why specifically that entity? Now, in fact, let me actually break down each type of entity and break down why a limited liability company, which is a LLC, whether you do already have a company in a foreign country or whether you are just starting from scratch, you don't have a company, why a LLC would probably be the best bet. And so let me start by explaining what a C Corp is. So a C Corp is one of the entities that you can open up if you want your company to be personally separated as a taxpayer. And so what you're doing here is that you are paying the corporate income tax and dividend to shareholders. And typically for the C Corp, if you've got a smaller company or if you're starting from scratch, a C Corp is maybe not the way that you want to go because you are double taxing yourself. But if you've got a substantial company, that might be an advantage for yourself. It sets up legitimacy for your own company. So I don't want to get too technical, but the C Corp involves more compliance, and it's better if you are planning to sell your company, right? So venture capital prefers to purchase a C corporation, a company that is incorporated as a C Corp instead of a company that's incorporated as another entity. Then let's move on to the S Corporation. Now, the S Corporation is one of the structures, but since you're a non-US business owner, you can't even open up a S corporation. So don't even consider this type of corporation because you can't even open it up. And then you've got the LLP, which is the limited liability partnership, which is mainly used by professionals in law and accounting and whatnot. So it's much less common for international founders. Moving on to the last type of corporation, which is the limited liability company. Pretty much this type of corporation is what you would call a liability shield. So it's pushing yourself away from that liability if anything happens to the company that you're about to build, as well as it allows flexible taxation. And that means that your LLC could be considered as a pass-through entity. So let me actually break down what this means specifically for you as a non-US business owner. If you do not have any companies, even in other foreign countries, setting up a US LLC as a pass-through entity into your own country or whatnot is the right way to go about it. So you've got your US LLC, and then the money that gets received into that US LLC is a pass-through entity into your own corporation in a foreign country, or maybe just personally you're being paid out by that LLC specifically, being the founder living in a foreign country, and you've got your LLC that is established in the USA. Or what you can do, which I was personally doing for quite a while, was you personally have a corporation in a foreign country. And so for my example, it was in the UAE. I had an incorporation in Dubai specifically, and that incorporation allowed me to pay 0% taxes. The problem with that incorporation, the tax advantages were great, but I was lacking on the financial advantages, the financial benefits that came along with a US LLC. So what is the perfect mix that you can have for your own personal situation if you have a LLC in a foreign country or whatnot? Is that you've got a US LLC that is a pass-through entity into your main primary company, which is a company in Cyprus, a company in the Netherlands, a company in wherever you may be. And essentially that LLC receives payments. So your US corporation receives the payments, right? It allows you to actually get the financial advantages, payment processors, banking, access to capital, and whatnot. And then if you prefer to send the money back to your home country, then you're sending it back to your corporation, right? So essentially, the limited liability company, the US LLC, is basically the gateway into accessing those premium benefits. So without talking too much into the technical stuff about a LLC, that is really the recommendation I would give to most non-US citizens. And so you might think, well, JP, if I'm setting up a US corporation, does that mean that now I'm going to need to pay tax in the USA and tax in my home country, right? Like, I'm already being taxed in Canada. Why do I have to be taxed again? So in my circumstance right now, I live in Canada. I'm a Canadian citizen at the moment. I've got my US LLC and my Canadian corporation. My Canadian corporation is the corporation that is taxing me at the moment because I'm a resident of Canada and I have to remain tax compliant to the place that I'm living personally. But I've got a US LLC receiving all my payments, allowing me to access American credit, American capital, and whatnot. And so with that US LLC, given that I am a non-US resident, non-US citizen, that allows me, given a few circumstances again, and I've broken down the legality about this in other videos, which you can probably take a look in my channel. Essentially, being a non-US citizen, non-US resident, that allows me to pay no taxes because there are IRS tax statutes within the tax code that basically claim that I'm an alien to the United States. And as long as I am not, quote, stimulating US resources with that LLC, then I don't need to pay taxes with that US LLC because I'm a non-US citizen, non-US resident, as well as the fact that I'm not stimulating the US economy. What does that mean specifically? I'm going to make this a bit more in depth. Stimulating the US economy means that I've got a location, for example, a real physical location that's doing commerce in real life in the USA. Or if I had any US-based employees or a large majority of my clients were from the US, in that circumstance, then a US LLC would probably be taxed in that circumstance. But again, in most non-US citizen circumstances, you're going to be able to use the US LLC and not pay any taxes. So it pretty much allows you to get all the financial advantages of being in the United States without having the negatives, which is the taxes and whatnot, right? So now that you've made your decision that you want to set up this US LLC, let's go through everything that you need before you start incorporating, right? So you've got to know your business name, the codes, NAICS codes and whatnot. Let's start with it. So your business name, generally you'd want to go for something that is a bit more broad, right? Something like Global Ventures LLC or something kind of group or whatever, right? A more general word will typically allow you to be looked at as a lower risk specific company. And the reason why this is important is because if you want to get access to credit, if you want to get access to those financial resources, sometimes they might assume that you're in a certain industry, and typically some lenders will not want to deal with people in certain industries. And what that includes is people in the gambling industry, in the sex industry, or in other kind of industries that are not preferable, like the restaurant industry or whatnot. And there's a lot of lenders that just prefer not to give approvals to companies that have those kind of names. And then the second thing you want to have is your NAICS codes. NAICS codes is basically called the North American Industry Classification System. So it classifies you within the industry that you're working with. And so typically, if you're starting from scratch, I would recommend these types of NAICS codes. Code 541611, which is management consulting, or 541613, or 611430, which is professional training or whatnot, right? So unless you have a specific NAICS code that is connected to your industry, it would be best to choose a NAICS code in the consulting or marketing industry. Because again, if you tie yourself to an industry in the casino industry, the money services industry, the investment securities industry, then you might be looked at as a higher risk company, which by the way, you do not want that to happen, and that will ruin your odds of getting access to credit and business funding and whatnot. Then it's going to be your business description. Just make sure it's a simple one-line statement required in most filings. Then it is your business address, right? So having a US corporation, you need to have a US business address. And so personally, what I've seen a lot of people do and what I do for my clients is that for us, we either get the clients to utilize our locations, so our business locations that we personally purchase on the client's behalf, or you can use a mail forwarding service, which you can find online, right? So like any of those other mail forwarding services, you can purchase a real address where they will receive mail and basically that will be your business address. They'll receive mail and they can forward it to wherever you live in the world. And so one thing to keep in mind is that your business address, it's very important that this is a real proven address, that not like 1,000 people are using that same address, because that has become a thing in this industry. A lot of non-US citizens are leveraging this arbitrage and they are having their own US LLCs, and that meaning a lot of people are using similar addresses because these forwarding services might allow 100 people to use the same address, which, by the way, that's low quality. For us, we personally purchase addresses and only allow a certain limit of people to use that same address, right? So you want to avoid PO boxes. You want to avoid CMRA addresses, so commercial mail forwarding centers, UPS store boxes, and registered agent addresses, because in that context, if you take the extra mile to get a good business address, then you will have less problems with the banks when it comes to getting access to better credit products. And if this is feeling overwhelming, that is exactly why we've got our own services. I don't expect someone that's making $10,000 a month plus to learn every single minute detail to be able to get your LLC, and most importantly, get approved for multiple credit cards, business funding, and whatnot. So if you're a busy non-US business owner and you want our personal help, make sure to apply down below for our personal services. Now let's get into the third step, which is incorporating your LLC. And so the most important part when it comes to incorporating your LLC is picking your state. And so as a general rule, if you live in the United States, typically you want to incorporate in the state that you're living in, right? So if you live in Florida, you incorporate in Florida. Since you do not live in the US, you can choose whichever state you want to incorporate in, right? And so there's a lot of different states that people recommend, such as Florida, Delaware, Wyoming, Nevada, Texas, right? And so my personal tip is that you should most likely try to incorporate in Florida. Or if you want more privacy, then Wyoming might be a good deal. But personally, there's a reason why we've got a team in Florida. Because in Florida, they've got the most amount of banks. They're much more ITIN friendly, and they allow you to open up accounts with much more ease. But just breaking down exactly the different states specifically, Florida has a strong banking presence. It's a simple system where you can use sunbiz.org. There's no personal state income tax, and the filing fee is $125. In Delaware, there's better privacy, it's startup friendly, and there's a flat $300 annual franchise fee, as well as Wyoming, which has low annual fees, privacy protection, no state income tax. So if you want Wyoming, you want to basically be as private as you possibly can, then Wyoming might be a good deal. But if you want to go with Wyoming, again, like, you will need to set up your financial infrastructure in Wyoming, which preferably I would recommend you to do this in either Texas or Florida. Florida is, like, honestly the best one to do it. But again, this is for education purposes. No one come and sue me just because I told them to use Florida. But anyways, after you've chosen your state, then you've got to file the articles of organization. So you can either file them through the Secretary of State website, which for Florida, that's going to be the Sunbiz website. So the Secretary of State website. You can do it on other platforms such as Doula or Busy, Inkfile, or any of these other paid platforms. In my personal opinion, if you're doing it yourself, then you can use the paid platforms such as Doula, Inkfile, Busy, or whatever. If you're doing it with someone else, like our team, we personally will file your LLC through Sunbiz, because again, we'd rather work with the direct source and do the incorporation right there. So the required information that you're going to need to have is your company name, your business address, registered agent information, management structure, so it's member managed or manager managed, purpose/NAICS code, and the processing time is typically same day or up to 2 weeks timeline to just wait. And that's just depending on whichever state that you select. And keep in mind that after you've incorporated, after you've done this whole process, you can, of course, update the information on your LLC. So if you end up realizing that the address that you used end up being blacklisted by the banks, you can, of course, update that information. But typically, for most states, you're going to need to pay a $100 fee or whatnot to be able to update the information on your company specifically. Now let's move on to the next step, which is getting your EIN number. Your employer identification number, pretty much that is the federal tax ID that allows you to open up different accounts, business accounts, business credit cards. Typically, you're going to need your EIN number to do any tax filings and whatnot. So how do you apply to get your EIN number? If you have a ITIN, a individual taxpayer identification number, or a SSN, then you can pretty much immediately get your EIN number by going to the IRS website specifically. And if you're a non-US citizen, you have no idea what this means. You won't have an SSN, but you could have a ITIN. If you are a non-US citizen, you don't have your ITIN, That is, I would say, the most important tax ID number that you should be getting to start establishing your credit foundation and whatnot inside the United States. So get your ITIN if you don't have one. But if you want to know the other way to get your EIN number, pretty much what you can do is complete a specific form, which is the form SS4. And pretty much once you complete that specific form, then you'll need to wait between 4 days to up to 4 weeks to get your EIN number. And so pretty much those are the two ways to get your EIN number. Now let's talk about the last step, which is maintaining your LLC. And pretty much this is like the compliance ongoing obligations. When it comes to a non-US citizen that needs to remain compliant, again, keep in mind, if you do not make these filings or pay the annual fees, there are specific fees if you are late to maintaining your LLC. And so the first thing when it comes to compliance is actually paying those annual fees for that LLC, for your corporation, as well as your IRS compliance. So if you've got a foreign-owned member LLC, then you must file the form 5472 plus pro forma 1120 each year if there's any money that was transacted within that LLC. And if you do not file, then there will be a penalty of $25,000 for failure. So make sure you do make that filing if you've made money through that LLC. And then there's a few other minute details, which I think are a bit too technical, which I'd prefer not to cover in this video, but you understand the typical framework that you're going to need to follow in order to set up your US LLC. So what are the steps after your formation, right? So what happens once you have your EIN number, you have your articles of incorporation, you have all of your details when it comes to the business and the LLC. What is now open to you and what is available? Well, what's available now is pretty much business bank accounts. What's also available is business credit cards, as well as the fact that you can start building up your personal credit identity inside of the United States. So look, forming a US LLC is just the first step, because once you have your LLC set up correctly, you unlock something that most non-US business owners have no idea even exists. I'm talking about the advantages that let you fly first class for a fraction of the price, potentially accessing 6 figures plus in 0% interest business credit, and the ability to compete at the same level as other American business owners. The entrepreneurs who understand these 6 advantages are scaling faster and build wealth at rates that seem impossible to everyone else. So take action about everything that I talked about when it comes to incorporating your LLC today. But once you've done that, I suggest you to watch this next video talking about the 6 advantages that you get by accessing the American financial system. This video will actually talk about what's possible after you've got access to your US LLC, what you can potentially get access to at this point. Don't just consume the information, implement it. So I'll see you in the next video.